Hi, Rabbi Skolnik here. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share some words of Torah with you on Parashat Beshalach, which is the ongoing story in the book of Exodus of the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt in the ancient world. Parashat Beshalach is most famous, of course, for Shirat Hayam, the Song of Moses, which was sung on the occasion of the splitting of the Sea of Reeds when the Israelites came to the edge of the water. But there are other aspects of Parashat Beshalach that are fascinating and worthy of a moment or two of thought, and I'd like to share them with you. The first has to do with a verse which is usually fairly quickly passed over, no pun intended, when we read the very first aliyah of this parasha, the first portion. The Torah tells us, Vayikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo. Moshe, when it was time for the Israelites to leave Egypt, he went and gathered up the remains of Yosef, of Joseph, and brought them with him back in the Exodus, and they would be carried, according to tradition, in an aron, in an ark, or if you will, in a coffin, side by side after the revelation of Torah, with the ark that contained Luchot HaBrit, the tablets of the revelation of Torah. And this is really a fascinating aspect of the Exodus that the Midrash explains to us, is a prime example of midah keneged midah, of measure for measure. If you remember, Yaakov, when he died, Jacob, before he died, he made his son Joseph swear to him, Al na tikbereni b'Mitzrayim, don't bury me in Egypt. Yaakov never forgot that Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan, what we would ultimately call Eretz Yisrael, was his ancestral home promised to him by God. And he didn't want to be buried in Galut. He didn't want to be buried in the diaspora. So he made Joseph promise him that after his death, he would bring his remains back to Eretz Canaan for proper burial in Me'arat HaMachpelah, in the cave of Machpelah, along with the other patriarchs and matriarchs. The rabbis comment that it's midah keneged midah, that it's measure for measure, because ultimately there was no one more prestigious or more powerful in the clan of the Israelites at that time than Joseph, who was second in command. So it's Moses himself who goes to reclaim Joseph's bones at the time of the Exodus in order to bring them back for reinterment in the land of Israel. Now, if you think about it chronologically, the Exodus takes place a long time after the death of Joseph. In fact, the book of Exodus begins with the words that a new Pharaoh arose who didn't even know who Joseph was. Right? So a lot of time has evolved or has passed since the time of Joseph and the story of Joseph and his brothers to the time where the Israelites became so numerous and then subsequently enslaved and subsequently redeemed. So the Midrash has its own little field day with this. The biggest issue being, how in the world did Moshe know where Yosef was buried? You know, we don't casually disinter altogether in Jewish tradition. We have a very strong tradition of leaving people buried where they are, except that to disinter in order to bury in Eretz Yisrael is generally, by most rabbinic authorities, considered to be permitted. So how did he know even where to look for Joseph? And the Midrash says that there was one remnant of the time of Joseph, and that was a woman who surfaces from time to time in the Midrash. Her name was Serach bat Asher. Serach, the daughter of Asher, Asher being one of the 12 sons of Jacob. If you're going to go by conventional chronology, Serach bat Asher would have been a very, 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 very old woman by then. But the Midrash is never all that concerned with issues of time and conventional chronology. And Serach bat Asher tells Moses that the Egyptians buried Joseph in a metal coffin that they put into the Nile. And according to the Midrash, Moshe goes to the banks of the Nile once he knows this, and he starts calling out, Yosef, Yosef, Higia Zman Geulatcha, the time of your redemption has come. We are all leaving, we're going back to Canaan, and miraculously the casket, the iron casket that's at the bottom of the Nile River, comes floating to the top of the river, and Moshe gathers it in. It's really a beautiful agadah, a beautiful legend, and it shows that Moshe paid Yosef the same honor that Yosef had paid his father Yaakov, namely that the most prestigious member of his generation saw to the proper burial. The other thing that should be mentioned briefly has to do with Miriam. And we know from a variety of contemporary sources that have made their way into the Seder that Miriam played a very important role in the Exodus. Many of us put a Miriam's cup on the table of water, fresh water, because of the tradition that wherever Miriam went, the Israelites always found a well of fresh water, even in the desert. But one of the great passages about the Exodus in the Torah is that when the Israelites got to the other side of Yam Suf, of the Sea of Reeds, they started to dance, led by Miriam and the women, with their timbrels, with like tambourines and drums. And the Midrash says, well, how in the world did they know to bring along tambourines and drums? They left in such great haste. And they didn't even have time to bake bread. So how did they bring along tambourines and drums and timbrels? And the Midrash answers that the women of that generation were of such strong faith that they knew that God would be performing miracles for them, and they wanted to celebrate. They wanted to be ready to celebrate. And that's why Miriam and all of the women who followed her led all of the Israelites together in dance and song in celebration of the Exodus. Shabbat Shalom.